Good morning and thank you for joining us. We'll be getting going in just a few minutes. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Vikash Reddy, and I'm the Vice President of Research at the Campaign for College Opportunity. This past winter, the campaign released our report, Still Left Out, a report documenting the underrepresentation of Latinx, Black, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaskan Native students and residents among the leadership of California's public colleges and universities. Today, I am grateful to our guests who have joined me for the third of three pivotal, still left out conversations to discuss tangible ways we can increase the representation of students from minoritized backgrounds in leadership at California's higher education institutions, today focused on the Cal State University system. As the lead author of this report, I want to personally thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Before we get started, I want to mention that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel following the conclusion of today's conversation. We are also looking forward to taking questions from our live audience today. Please place your questions in the Q&A section below, and we'll address them later on in the program. Finally, please join us and follow the conversation online using the hashtag #StillLeftOut. This morning, we dive into an issue critical to California's higher education system. Our state continues to exclude Latinx, Black, Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, and American Indian, Alaskan Native Californians from key positions within our public higher education institutions, seriously limiting the potential of our students, our democracy, and our economy. Racial, ethnic, and gender diversity are core values of California. But by not addressing the real disparities that exist in college and university representation, we perpetuate a cycle of white male dominance for all. We must ensure that the pride we feel in the strength of our multiracial state is translated into equitable opportunities and experiences for the most diverse student body in the nation. Our conversation today is rooted in vision and action, sharing a 5-year journey of progress since our groundbreaking report in 2018, which first laid bare the extent of underrepresentation in higher education leadership in California. Our Left Out report was a wake-up call for many, spurring conversations across our systems to act for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. 5 years later on, our analyses of the leadership and faculty at the University of California, the Cal State University, and the California Community Colleges show that in spite of strides made, California's leaders still do not reflect the rich diversity of California's population, of which 61% are Latinx, Black, Asian American, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, and American Indian Alaskan Native. Before I go on, I want to thank Michelle Siqueiros for her contributions to this report, as well as David Drummer, our senior research analyst, and 3 teams of research fellows who helped collect and analyze the data that underlie these findings. The stakes for this report are high, and the findings in it are incredibly high. In today's contentious climate, students are increasingly met with attacks on efforts towards diversity, all while facing persistent barriers to college, the impacts of COVID, the Supreme Court decision in the cases brought against Harvard and the University of North Carolina, curtailing race-conscious admissions, and the unacceptable delays with the new FAFSA. If our college and university leaders are not intentional about creating inclusive campus and system environments that students need and frankly deserve, we risk further alienating them and the very communities that these institutions serve. We fail to provide role models for our students. We neglect the wealth of perspectives that can drive innovation in our state, and we fail to close stubborn equity gaps to a college degree for the students who stand to benefit the most. Our conversation today will explore these challenges at the California State Universities and the steps we must take to create a more inclusive future. The publication is a testament to our continued commitment to equitable representation that mirrors our society's diversity. It is my pleasure now to introduce Cal State student Autumn Alaniz Wiggins, who will present the report findings related to the CSU. Autumn is an inspiring social researcher and advocate with a profound commitment to public service and philanthropy, particularly in the realms of higher education and community advocacy. She's finishing up her dual BA degrees in sociology and multicultural and gender studies from CSU Chico, and she has honed a deep understanding of social inequities and multicultural dynamics. Autumn's leadership was exemplified in her roles as president of the CSU Chico Associated Student Government and previous director of social justice and equity, where she spearheaded initiatives to enhance inclusivity and address systemic challenges. Autumn's work, driven by a passion for equitable education and community empowerment, reflects her unwavering dedication to creating meaningful change in society. As you listen to Autumn's presentation, I once again invite you to visit the Campaign for College Opportunities website to download the full report. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Campaign for College Opportunity for having me here today. My name is Autumn Alaniz Wiggins, and I serve as the student body president at Chico State University. As an Afro-Indigenous, Hispanic, and first-generation student, I have worked to uplift and empower student voices in the university and system-wide committees. Despite many opportunities that have opened doors, I am still being left out. My story in higher education began at Camp Mendocino in 2018, where I was the garden specialist for the Boys and Girls Club of San Francisco for underprivileged youth. I built a modest garden program into a culturally responsive educational platform filled with transformative topics such as food justice, nutrition access, and yes, how to plant a potato. Cultural richness within nutrition pushed me to pursue a degree at Chico State in nutrition communications. I was excited to feel empowered studying nutrition, but as I started my classes, I uncovered a program that was not quite culturally responsive, teaching about the benefits of kale and quinoa rather than the intersectionalities of systemic racism, food swamps, and nutritional inequities impacting children, like the ones I worked with at Camp Mendocino. It quickly became clear to me that the absence of diverse identities in faculty and leadership positions hinder us from equitable student success, causing ripple effects for holistic advocacy to address diverse student needs. This is not an issue affecting only my campus, but one that is prevalent across the California State University. Today, student enrollment at the CSU is incredibly diverse, with over 2/3 of the student body identifying as Latinx, Black, Asian American, or Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. Still, leadership and faculty are overwhelmingly white. Let's jump into the data. Here, you can see a breakdown of Latinx leadership in CSU in 2017 and 2021. For Latinx students, who made up 47% of the CSU student body in 2021, representation is sorely lacking. No leadership body, except the system-wide chancellor's office, which was 43% Latinx in 2021, is near parity. For example, a shocking 2% of the CSU Academic Senate was Latinx in 2017. And while this has increased to 11% in 2021, still, 70% of Academic Senate is white. Minimal progress has been made in campus senior leadership and faculty bodies, growing just a few percentage points in the 5-year timeframe. Clearly, we need to do more to ensure that we are not excluding a majority of our system students from having leaders who share their backgrounds and experiences. Black Californians are better represented among CSU leaders at the system and campus levels. And though the CSU student and faculty populations do not reflect the state's diversity, Black faculty representation in the academic senate of the CSU has risen to 9%. The share of Black trustees and campus senior leaders has also grown. Campus senior leadership seeing the largest growth of 6 percentage points. However, we have seen no progress in tenured faculty positions and only 1 percentage point increase in non-tenured roles. It is clear that we must not only prioritize the representation of Black college leadership at the CSU, but also ensure that we are strengthening Black student enrollment and persistence. Next, we look at representation in Asian Americans and NHPIs in leadership, who account for 16% of the CSU student body. When the Campaign for College Opportunity examined these positions 5 years ago, there were no Asian American or NHPI trustees. The board is now 19% Asian American and NHPI. We also see a strong representation in tenured faculty positions at 19%. The unfortunate news is that representation dropped in campus senior leadership in this 5-year period from 14 to 10%, making Asian Americans and NHPIs underrepresented in this body. There are bright spots, however. The Board of Trustees, previously 70% white, now has greater representation of Latinx, Black, Asian American, and NHPI leaders. Of our current membership, 38% are white. Even so, in all but 2 leadership bodies examined and still left out, the trustees and recent tenured or untenured track hires, white leaders were greatly overrepresented, still making at least half of each body 5 years later. This is compared to the student population, which is 21% white. CSU has made the greatest progress in representation of women. 5 years later, about half of the CSU presidents, half of the campus senior leaders, and more than half of the CSU Board of Trustees are women. In fact, most positions are closer to parity. In 2021, women made up 57% of the student body. The academic senate was just 40% women in 2017. But in 2021, this grew up to 48%. The Board of Trustees saw the greatest change, increasing from just 35% women to 56%. As a proud student leader, I am thrilled to see these gains, but I know it is not nearly adequate enough to make systemic changes that reflect our students. Frankly, in my work as a student leader, I have noticed misguided efforts to enact systemic change. Transformative stories and ideas made to empower and uplift diversity are watered down, landing on the shoulders of tokenized Black and Brown students and campus leaders to follow through. The data clearly shows we are not doing enough to combat decades of inequities and representation across the CSU system. Strategic methods and targeted practices to recruit, and most importantly, retain diverse faculty and administrators must be a priority. And for our students, having faculty who reflect them is a necessary strategy to ensure their enrollment and persistence at the CSU. For myself, a lack of belonging, coupled with affordability issues, took a toll on my mental health, and I decided to leave college for over a year. When I returned, I met an incredible professor, Dr. Seth Cloboto, who was the new and the first Black faculty member I had. He taught culturally relevant courses and even hired me as a research assistant, where I became published through my first study as a nutritional knowledge on EOP students. For the first time, I was getting the support I needed from the start. I longed for more beyond Dr. Cloboto's unique support. So I switched majors to multicultural gender studies and sociology, where I experienced a different realm of student success. The diversity of the professors and the care that they brought to instruction was much more extensive, providing not just academic support, but a sense of well-being and a safe space. Their support inspired me to run for Director of Social Justice and Equity, which has brought me here before you today. Now I represent almost 14,000 students as AS president and nearly 500,000 students through CSSA. I have worked diligently to pave my path and find my sense of belonging in college, and I could not have done it without the support of professors that reflect the same experiences that I have in the classes they teach. For the sake of our students and the future of California, we must remind ourselves why the CSU system, the People's University, exists to educate the new majority of America. We need that majority to reflect in our educators and pay them what they are worth. Let's make faculty diversity a core priority in the work to advance student success and close equity gaps. Policymakers and system leaders alike could and should be more intentional at directing campus presidents and academic senate leaders towards improved experiences for faculty, staff, and students. We must invest in strengthening diverse and equitable admissions, hiring, and retention practices so that people who look like me are no longer systemically left out. I leave you with a quote from James Baldwin: "Not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Autumn, for that wonderful presentation and also for the life that you give these data. Unfortunately, Autumn is not available or able to join us for the remainder of the discussion. I am pleased to note that Cristian Reyes, a senior at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, will be joining today's panel, and you'll be hearing from Cristian shortly. Also joining me for this discussion are Dr. Jennifer Baszile, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Success and Inclusive Excellence at the Cal State University Office of the Chancellor, and Dr. Román Liera, Assistant Professor of Higher Education in the Department of Educational Leadership at Montclair State University, and himself a Cal State alum. I would again invite folks in the audience to use the QA feature to submit your questions for the panelists. But as they get going, I'd like to start with you, Dr. Baszile, and just get your general reactions to the report as a whole, and the parts that focus on the Cal State University in particular.
Sure. So it's great to be here with you. I appreciate the opportunity. I also really appreciate Autumn's presentation of the data and her insights. I think that what Autumn has really done and what I expect that Cristian will do, I'm glad to see him here as well. I expect that this is really the moment where the California State University that has this broad access mission is being called on, rightly so, to really lead the nation in the imagination with which we align leadership success with student success. And we take our aspirations and really make them real in ways that students can see on timelines that align with student experience, right? I think Autumn made really compelling points about the ways in which trustee leadership has changed in terms of representation, presidential leadership has changed in terms of representation. But the fact of the matter is, in the places where students experience the most direct contact and engagement, that is the place that has been seemingly most resistant to change, right? And so I think that this is a moment to really have just the conversation that the report calls for, which is an honest, action-oriented conversation about what can be done in the near term on timelines that students can understand and experience to really uplift and realign our priorities around equity. So I'm really just excited to be here and to have the conversation.
And thank you. And Dr. Liera, I want to get your immediate reactions to the report and its findings.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I echo the remarks. And also, I appreciate Autumn's comments. Just to add to what was shared, one of the things that really stood out to me was the role of faculty, specifically her story when she kind of like left and came back and encountered a new faculty. I think she said Black faculty, which I would think it's equity minded because he was culturally relevant in his teaching, right? Which prompted her to change majors, right? So I think for me, the things that I react is kind of like, yes, we need to diversify the professoriate, but also understanding where do we need the most, not only diverse faculty in terms of disciplines, right? But also them being equity minded as well. So I think in this sense, in the work that I've done, you could change structures, you could create accountability, right? And then a lot of times at the discipline level, the department level, that's where you encounter a lot of the, not just resistance, but also not understanding what equity work and what does that have to do with their, for example, STEM discipline, right? So I think in that sense, I agree. I think that's what really stood out to me from her commentary. And I think the data itself really highlights and elevates that. And then also the prompting of the question, like, what areas need the additional work and more work, right? Because we are also losing students in fields that we also need diverse folks in those societies. So I'll pause there because I had other reactions, but I think that was the main one that really stood out to me at this point.
Excellent. Don't lose your notes because I'm coming back to you. But Cristian, I want to turn to you. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. And I'd love to get your reaction to the findings and to Autumn's presentation that you just heard.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm so excited to be here in community with you all today. But I think I really resonated with Autumn's experience as a student. I, just like Autumn, also switched majors. I initially came into Cal Poly as a biology major, but I just felt like I wasn't seeing myself in the classroom. And I turned to resources, and those resources, I didn't see people who were representative of who I am. And I ended up switching majors, and now I'm in a child development major, and I feel like the field that I'm in is a lot much more diverse. And I'm able to see myself in my professors. I'm able to see a lot more peers who look like me. And I think the representation, not only in the classroom, but also in the resources available to me, are much more representative of who I am. And I think that's contributed to my success.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. So getting a little more specific then, I'll start again with you, Dr. Baszile, and thinking about some of the efforts at the Chancellor's office to create greater equity among, on campuses, thinking about representation and leadership. And I might also note that, there's a search open for leadership at Bakersfield right now. The nation's largest four-year system. There seems to be opportunities every few years, at least, for some of these conversations. So I'd love for you to talk more about, how is the Chancellor's office approaching some of these questions right now?
Sure. Well, there are programs that have been established and that have been shown both in the research and in terms of the outcome to work, right? So there's the California Predoctoral Program, which identifies students, undergraduate students who have an interest in coming into faculty roles and pursuing graduate education, right? That's terrific. There is the Chancellor's Doctoral Incentive Program, which focuses on students who are in graduate school and again, are helping really move them onto the pathway into the ranks of the faculty. And then there are a number of initiatives around cluster hiring that have been proven to work, where cohorts of faculty are coming onto campuses. San Diego State University, many of our universities have these practices. And those are really terrific and they are really impactful. I think similarly at the presidential level, you will see that there are a number of diverse leaders from a variety of backgrounds who are coming into presidencies within the California State University. But again, that is not the place necessarily where students are experiencing impact. The life cycle of faculty is a very different life cycle and a work cycle than the student life cycle, right? A career may be 20 years plus, right? So faculty turnover unfolds on a different time cycle than even presidents and senior leaders, right? There's much more mobility in terms of those senior most level leaders. The other thing that I would really just want to drill down on with regard to this is really how the CSU is taking a look at how faculty labor really unfolds in the lives of students, right? The teaching, the service, the research, which are the three pillars of promotion through the ranks. And we are really having to have really important conversations as we contemplate what happens in the next graduation initiative about what kinds of service are being made visible in the lives of faculty, whether they take on roles in the academic senate or whether they take on other kinds of roles in terms of service and support to students. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And I can also acknowledge that as much as we're doing, there is still more that has to be done. The final thing that I will say is, as these things are taking effect, really part of the question that we are asking is, how can we keep equity at the center of our efforts with regard not just to faculty success, but student success, to make sure that our faculty are equipped to understand the needs of the talented students who are in our classrooms every day, and to make sure that we are working as hard as we can to address educational achievement gaps. So it's a really multi-pronged effort, and there's more that we can do.
And Dr. Liera, I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of how do we address kind of the life cycle of the faculty but acknowledge the urgency of now, right? What are some ways that campuses can do? I know that Dr. Baszile did talk about cluster hiring. What are your thoughts on sort of the equity-minded hiring processes for both faculty and leadership?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And then thank you, Dr. Baszile, for the commentary and the context. One of the things that I want to pick up on some of your echo and add to some of the comments that you made. When I do agree that the one-on-one interaction is at the faculty, so that's a big area to the area in terms of their lifespan on a campus and their impact on the campus culture. However, I do see also the importance of senior leadership at each level, from department chairs to deans, to, up the ranks to the chancellors, right? Because a lot of times the faculty who are doing the work, a lot of it can be at the department level, right? But then there's no structural support in terms of like salaries, right? Resources in order to continue doing the work. So I think to maintain and keep the equity-minded faculty, we also need to the equity-minded senior leadership to be able to provide those resources, right? And I think one of the things that I'll highlight the cluster hiring. I'm doing a project with some of my colleagues on cluster hiring, and then seeing how a lot of folks advancing equity are really utilizing these spaces to kind of like not only diversify the professoriate, but bring in faculty who are doing like equity-minded type of work. But the limitations happen is that there's oftentimes a hidden assumption that because they're coming in as clusters, that they're automatically going to develop this community, right? And then it kind of like removes the responsibility of these people in these different places to create these structures, right? So I think that there's different things that could happen, requirement of mentoring plans and other things, right? So I think that those are areas that I do agree that cluster hiring could be very powerful, but also could be kind of a little bit of a misleading if we don't like intentionally think about it and how to continue diversifying the faculty in that way, right? And sustain them. Because there was another question that you had asked me about the life of the faculty, and I want to make sure
Well, I think so. We've got, there's this argument that faculty and Dr. Baszile, I think, stated it very, very well. The sort of the life cycle of the faculty is long, right? And so change is difficult to affect on a shorter time frame. So, how do we navigate that space?
Right. And I think here it's where it becomes a bit challenging in terms of what can you require faculty to do, right? I mean, you could say there's training around it, kind of like what the work that Dr. Sullivan on her center used to do with the equity-minded training, right? The inquiry stuff. A lot of it has to be voluntary, right? But also I've been working with different campuses where they try to be intentional and then provide this type of information in terms of why is it important to address your practices from an equity-minded lens. What does equity-mindedness look like, right? There's a misperception, I think, among the faculty, especially because they're tenure faculty, that you're asking us to deprioritize our content and assess content expertise just to hire someone who's an equity-minded perspective, right? I go, actually, that's not what it is, right? An equity-minded faculty member doesn't necessarily have to do like study racial inequalities like I do, right? But they could be equity-minded in their mentoring with students and interaction with colleagues and the committee work that they do. If they're in STEM, what type of research they're doing to, especially at the Cal States, I think it's an opportunity to really integrate the local community, right? In terms of like the history of the Cal State. So I think there's conversations I imagine with these faculty to have. And I think for the work, there's going to be resistance, but it doesn't mean that shouldn't, those conversations shouldn't happen in terms of keep helping understand what is the role of equity-minded work and not just in hiring as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think one of the things, so I mentioned this kind of at the top of the introduction, are these attacks on DEI initiatives, right? We're seeing programs rolled back and eliminated, people fired in certain states. And so I'm wondering kind of how you see those or that landscape playing into some of these challenges You know, Dr. Baszile, maybe I'll start with you again, kind of thinking about, you know, the challenges to DEI, the political challenges, in addition to just sort of the logistical challenges of making it work, right? How is the Cal State thinking about that in the current context?
Yeah, I think that this is a place where in the Cal State system, we have to acknowledge our privilege, right? Because we work in a context where we prove every day that there is not an antipathy between rigor and excellence and inclusion and equity, right? That's at the center of what we do. And so I think that it puts on us a responsibility to be even more forthright and even more assertive in the way that we really center our students and the diversity of the students and the state that we serve. And we say loudly and proudly and boldly that there is not that this is just a myth, right? And that we don't have to buy into it. And that all across our universities and throughout the layers of our institutions, our results will prove over and over again, along with our 4 million alumni, that this antipathy doesn't really exist and that we can provide a transformational, broad access, excellent and rigorous education to our students, and that we have strong partnerships, albeit partnerships that can get better and improve, between administrators and senior leadership and faculty and students, in which this process can happen. So I think part of it has to do with messaging, but the other part of it also has to do with results. The last thing I'll say is that I think we also really have an opportunity in terms of disaggregating and measuring to really talk about the ways in which particularly service on campus unfolds. Part of the power, as you and the campaign and the CSU Chancellor's Office, we know there is power in measurement and evaluation. And part of what we can do is really we can take a look at what kinds of service, for example, is being rewarded and validated, and what kinds of service remains invisible, right? Are there disproportions in the way that faculty labor is being invested in mentoring students? Does it fall disproportionately on instructional non-tenured line faculty? Does it fall on more junior faculty? Is it more concentrated in some departments rather than in others? I mean, these are all really important questions. And so I think that we really do have an opportunity. And I think as the CSU, we have a particular responsibility in the national context to really be forthright in service of the values of our state and our communities, to say that we reject this false narrative that says that we can't be inclusive and excellent all at the same time.
Thank you for that. Cristian, I'd love to get your perspective on well, I mean, anything that you've heard in this conversation so far, but in particular, I'm wondering if you could just talk about sort of the, you know, the impact in your life of the diversity and leadership at various levels that you've seen, you know, from faculty to, as Dr. Liera was talking about, deans and other administrators.
Yeah, I think a pivotal point in this conversation has been bringing up the issue of mentorship. And I think mentorship has played a crucial role in my success, from administration to faculty to even staff members on campus. I know I had mentioned earlier that I switched majors, and I think a particular reason that I did switch majors was because I didn't feel supported in my major. I never saw faculty who looked like me. I never resonated with the lived experiences of a faculty member. And until I switched to child development, I was able to have a much more diverse body of faculty members that were teaching me in the classroom. And I was also able to go to for mentorship opportunities. And I think I know a particular mentor that has helped me a lot is Dr. Tina Chuk, who I bonded over, who immigrated to the United States when she was younger. And I, as a son of immigrants, kind of felt a little worried to bring that up into the classroom where a faculty member was white, and I feared that they wouldn't understand my experiences or the concerns that I had. And it wasn't until I was able to have those conversations with Dr. Tina Chuk, who was able to tell me, like, yeah, like, I completely understand what you're talking about. And from there, she was able to provide much more opportunities. But I think at the same time, another concern that I do have is for these faculty members that are doing all of that mentorship, what support and what resources are we providing them? Because I know a lot of the times these faculty members are taking on mentorship opportunities, but they're also heavily involved in a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And this is where racial battle fatigue comes into play, where a lot of faculty members are burning themselves out because they're trying to do the work that they wish they would have seen. And I think it's a continuous cycle that's really rooted in institutions. So I think we can do a much more better job at supporting our faculty members and also compensating them for the additional work that they're doing.
Dr. Liera, I'm going to turn to you as a faculty member who I'm sure feels some of those pressures. Can you talk about, yeah, kind of what institutions can do, need to do, and any successful models, you know, that you've seen out there in your research and work would be also really great.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Cristian and Dr. Baszile for the commentary. You know, I know before this question you asked about the AI context, right? I think for the way that I think about it is that it's an opportunity, right, to reimagine and re-strategize, right, and how to really change the system, right? Because I think even before, right, we oftentimes focus on one specific practice or strategy, right, without saying, well, this is kind of like the silver bullet, right? So I think we know that that hasn't necessarily been the outcome. So I guess I say that because I think this is a great opportunity as a community to really think about what are the different spaces and systems that we need to change and really distribute the responsibility across multiple units, right? Not just in one specific office, not just at the top of the system or at the bottom with the faculty, right? So I think that's it's an opportunity to reimagine how can we really re-strategize and think about the larger structures that we need to change collectively. In terms of success models, I think it varies across campus, right? A lot of it, you could call it success if you hire more faculty of color, like through cluster hiring, and you think about the outcome, right? But then you could say maybe it's not successful because they're not changing structures to retain these faculty, right? And then you could think about it at different units. Certain departments are doing better in terms of being more strategic about how to recruit, how to change the criteria, but also how to retain these faculty, right? By protecting their time, understanding that there's a need for specific type of faculty members in the department because of their students, kind of like Cristian was sharing. He connected really closely with someone who shares similar backgrounds, right? But because there's so many little of those type of faculty, right? This is where I believe department chairs along with their deans could be very strategic, right? In assessing, going back to Dr. Bazile's commentary about the importance of data collection, right? In terms of assessing and disaggregating data by race and ethnicity around these different metrics and responsibilities. So I've seen spaces who are very active in that sense, collecting data and assessing their practices and understanding their space to be able to develop realistic goals that could guide them to what changes they need to make.
And so Dr. Liera, I'm going to stick with you for just a second in because there's a sort of a thread in some of the chat and the questions around you know, the institutionalizing of some of these practices, right? This feeling that sometimes we can make great progress when we find the right leaders, but how do we sort of, you know, make it more of a systemic? And so I think some of that data collection and disaggregation and dissemination gets to that. But then how do you sort of, you know, you've led the horse to water, you brought the system to data, right? How do you make it act? Is sort of one of the questions.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. You know, I think this is where a lot of like the training and the understanding of not only how to collect and use data, but how to do it from an equity-minded lens and how to make it a routine, right? Make a routine in each type of practice, and you're teaching, for example, and then you're mentoring, right? And then assessing and collecting data. There's different types of data. I think sometimes when people think about data, it's only the quantitative, which is very important, right? But also another components of like mentorship, right? You could collect like qualitative type of data in terms of like documenting not only how many people or how many students you mentor, but the quality of the mentoring, right? The level of interactions, right? And that's type of stuff that deans could, department chairs could be collecting when it comes to tenure and reappointment and promotion, right? To utilize and assess, look, there's an inequality here because this a number of students are really gravitating towards this one faculty, which is great for the students. However, kind of like what Cristian was saying, what is that doing to this faculty member, right? And their impact on maybe on their productivity as researchers. So I think a lot of it, that's why I echo, because what you mentioned earlier, really not only the faculty, it's very important, but also the role of those leaders, right? The mid levels, but also the high level leadership. And being able to provide that accountability, yes, but also holding themselves accountable to be able to support the faculty to be able to do the equity work that we're asking them to do as well.
Can I just jump in here real quick?
Please.
You know, I think that one of the opportunities that California has that is maybe unique, but maybe not so unique, is that we can be a state where we grow our own according to our own values and our own vision, right? There is really an opportunity to rethink the nature of university experience from entry, frankly, from the community colleges, all the way through doctoral education, so that our graduate programs, our graduate training, our promotion processes really are equity-centered and equity-minded, right? And so that we're not just teaching content expertise in a particular subject, but that we are really growing a faculty, growing ranks of graduate students who have the specialized knowledge in curriculum design, universal design, pedagogy that goes along with that excellence that we're talking about. And that will really be part of the way that we can transform and be responsive to the students who are coming to and through not just the CSU, but the community colleges and the UC. And we are a state that is in a position to be able to do just that kind of thing, because there is an alignment in this way. And there is, I think, will in the public sector to really be able to do that. But I think that the other thing that I will just say really quickly is we have to stop getting fixated on a prestige economy view of higher education where we focus on exclusion. We have to really take a view that says, if we are committed and serious about access, if we are committed and serious about equity and inclusion, and we want to see it reflected, we're not looking outside of our system for models in, let's say, the Ivy League for what we're going to do, but we're going to design our own pathways through these institutions so that we get the outcomes for our staff and faculty and for our students, and we build the climate that we want, that we know is demonstrated and proven to really help students, faculty, and staff.
So I really appreciate that. I think somewhere deep in the report is a table of the 100,000 doctoral degrees that we produced in California, and a notable number from the Cal States. And so I think I might stick with you, Dr. Baszile, for just a second in that vein around, we're educating students from minoritized background, we're getting them PhDs, but I think, could you speak specifically about some of the pipeline programs at the Cal State? And then also, it does still to me feel like we have at the deans and department chair level greater diversity that is frequently pointed out to me by, in particular, presidents and vice chancellor, presidents and chancellors, right? But then there still seems to be an ivory ceiling that isn't being cracked, right? And so, again, kind of to the CSUs, to any sort of efforts of the CSU that you can and want to point to around kind of that leadership development and progression would be great.
Yeah, well, I think that part of what you're really talking about here, right? So there are those programs that I mentioned, and there are a number of pathway programs. But I think that what you're also really talking about is that next layer of leadership training and mentorship. That is an area where I think that we still have room to grow, right? So how do you take a talented faculty person or a talented instructor, engage in conversation, and then do the intentional development so that they can take on increasingly more impactful roles within these institutions. But the other thing that I want to say is that I am very present too. So I started my career in higher education as a faculty member, right? But part of what I know is there is a premium on trained, well-equipped faculty of color, right? They are being recruited away from California and from these institutions at exactly the moment when they can have this greater impact, right? They're being recruited to states where the cost of living is more affordable, where they can envision buying a home, right? There are all of these other pressures. So it's not just a matter of who we cultivate. We really have to be focused on, I hate to say it, more than a critical mass, right? And more than concentrations in one department or in a few places, to really be able to start to see the kind of change that we want, so that regardless of the discipline and at every rank in the institution, there really does have to be more dissection, more pressing into the data, and more action at every level of the institution to provide the informal and the formal training that allows for that leadership progression. And there is a hidden curriculum for graduate students. There is a hidden success formula or a less visible success formula to move from department chair to dean to division head. All of that is still very much opaque, right? And it's very relationally built. And so I think that these are places where we still have opportunity to press in and create more impact and more transparency.
Thank you. So Cristian, there's a question for you in the Q&A just about, your change of major and kind of, your thought process behind that, the support that you did or did not receive. I'm wondering, if you could just talk a little bit about kind of the process there, the support that you were looking for, and kind of how, the different departments played out in your process.
Yeah, I remember in my journey as a first generation student, just even having the thoughts of switching majors, I was like, this isn't something that should be happening. Is higher education my calling? Should I even continue my education? And I was having a lot of conflicting feelings and thoughts. And I talked to a professor, and they were like, if you feel like you want to study something else, go for it. So I didn't really feel supported in that sense. I feel like I needed that reaffirmation just to ensure, like, yeah, you're in the right place. It's not easy, but you're going to get through it. So from there, I went to the Mustang Success Center, which is a first year advising center on campus here. And I scheduled an appointment, and my counselor was a first generation Latina, who I really resonated a lot with. And I remember bawling to her and telling her how I was feeling. And she told me, I was there at one point too. I ended up switching majors. Um, and it just felt really affirming to be able to share my story and not only know that I was being acknowledged, but know that she had experienced something similar to me. And I think because of that, I was so open-minded, and I began to explore different majors, and I was also able to understand the process of how to change majors, which was a really, really difficult process. But because I felt so comfortable with my counselor, I was able to ask her those questions that were allowing me to make that successful change to child development. So I think really the role of not only faculty, but also of counselors, of different staff members and faculty members on campus, there needs to be representation amongst all levels. I think having that representation is crucial to student success. And that can be seen in the services that we're providing students, in what students are learning in the classroom and who they're learning it from, but also at the end of the day, who's making those decisions. So that's just a little bit more, but yeah, I think because of that one person that I really saw myself in, I was able to make that change. And now I feel like I don't have any regrets, and I don't look back on the decision that I've made.
Cristian, I changed my major, I think, 3 times in college. It's probably the most normal thing you can do. I think it means you actually were cut out for inquiry if you're thinking about what you really are into. So yeah, I just wanted to add my 2 cents there. I want to just sort of final question, and there's this question in the chat around of someone whose daughter is likely to commit to CSU San Marcos, but is wondering about sort of representation among faculty. And so I do wonder for Dr. Baszile, for Dr. Galera, to what extent the visibility of diversity in faculty, or even the DEI and the zeitgeist is impacting admissions to any of the institutions, around along the spectrum. And Dr. Litter, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, well, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that I'm an alumni. I transferred from Los Angeles Pierce College to San Diego State. And that was, I think, reflecting one of the best experiences in both places, right? But I do think representation matters. Similar experiences as Cristian has mentioned, like when I first got there was in the early 2000s. It was extremely white, and then the architecture of the missions, right, to me kind of like felt like I didn't belong in terms of like the history of colonialism in the state of California, right? So I think in that sense, not until I connected with a Latino faculty member in my major psychology, who really validated my experiences, right? And he said, "You're asking research questions, right?" So I think that in itself was very powerful and transformational for me, which I do believe gave me the confidence, right? And then like, Discover Research opened up graduate education, opened up PhD, opened up to become a faculty member, right? It trickled all the way down, right? So I think in that sense, it's very, very important because a lot of times folks, students of color and diverse students get lost in the sea of higher education, and Cal States are also pretty big spaces, right? So I think in that sense, I do believe representation matters, not just in the faculty, but also leadership. As Cristian mentioned, he connected with staff, administrators who also have been mentors to him.
Yeah, I just think that, I appreciate Christian's honesty, right? And his transparency and sharing his experience. And, while we should normalize the inquiry that is a, normal part of a routine part of the academic journey, right? It's the inquiry. But what we should be focused on is, and we should have our ears to, and I have my ears to tune to when students say, I didn't continue because I didn't see myself represented, right? That's different than I just took this great class, or I just, followed my passion. Now, that's not to say that there's anything wrong with switching majors, but I think it is incumbent upon leadership to be able to say and to press into the patterns, to be able to understand, is it a structural and climate issue that is driving students to some places and away from others, and then pressing into how do we really address that, right? So I think that there is really a role for institutional leadership and system-wide leadership into really creating the conditions where everywhere on a campus, there is, it's every door is the right door for belonging. Every door is the right door for validation and for affirmation of the experience, because that is part of what a truly equitable and transformational educational experience is supposed to look like. And it's our job not to stop until we get there.
Excellent. I would love any final thoughts from our panelists. Cristian, any final thoughts on kind of what you've heard today?
I do have a bit of final thoughts. I think also as a student leader, being involved in student government as Secretary of Diversity and Inclusion, interning at the Office of University Diversity and Inclusion, I see that a lot of student leaders that are tackling initiatives like this are students of color. So I think particularly like how are we representing our students of color? But there's also the consideration of intersectionality, being a queer Latino. I know I had a really difficult time finding my community on campus. So going to the Latinx Center, but oh, there's no queer people here. Like I don't feel safe being here. Then going to the Pride Center, there being no diversity in the Pride Center. So just kind of going back home and finding that community within my own space, because I wasn't able to find that community elsewhere. I think in moving forward, we have to consider intersectionality in all aspects to see how we can best serve students.
Thank you for that. I want to thank all three of our panelists, Dr. Román Liera, Dr. Jennifer Baszile, and Cristian Reyes. I also want to thank Alaniz Wiggins for participating in this critical discussion. In the foreword to the report, Dr. Estela Ben-Simon wrote, "Diversifying our higher education leadership and faculty requires the investment of energy, thought, and time to refashion a system that does not work for the needs of today's students or for our diverse nation. Though we may not yet have made much progress, our most significant strides are finally within reach when armed with data contained in this report. Real change requires action. We must remember the responsibility we bear to utilize these data to drive representation forward so that California can ensure inclusion in higher education for all and create a prosperous economy and democracy where everyone can contribute and excel. I encourage everyone to continue this conversation on social media using the hashtag #StillLeftOut, and please read the report linked to in the chat. Thank you again to our speakers for joining us today, and to those who are listening to this timely conversation. Let's continue this important work, inspired by the progress we've made and mindful of the journey ahead.